The blinding, toxic glow of my smartphone screen sliced through the absolute darkness of my bedroom like a digital dagger. It was precisely 3 o'clock in the morning, and the notifications were stacking up across my dashboard with the terrifying, uncontainable velocity of an island wildfire. With trembling fingers, I lifted the device, the harsh white light illuminating the cold, empty corners of my apartment as I forced my burning eyes to scan the viral post that had shattered my night. There, plastered across a massive local community network with over 50,000 active regional followers, was a high-resolution photograph of my face, bordered by an essay of pure, weaponized malice. The post had been authored by my own biological mother, Helen, and the words she had chosen were calculated to inflict the absolute maximum amount of social and psychological execution. My eldest daughter, Rebecca, has officially revealed herself to be a cold-hearted, greed-driven monster who would rather watch her own family starve than share her corporate wealth, the text read. We sacrificed everything to give her a baseline for success, yet the moment she secured her high-paying financial compliance position in the city, she drew a disgusting wall of selfishness around herself. She has officially cut off her struggling mother's grocery allowances, refused to support her younger brother's basic survival needs, and left us facing an immediate housing crisis out of pure, unadulterated arrogance. Please share this broadcast to expose the true, calculating sociopath hiding behind a pristine professional facade, because the community deserves to know how she treats her own bloodline. The comment section beneath the post was a grotesque, churning arena of public execution, with old high school acquaintances and faceless local strangers loudly branding me as an unfilial parasite. A deep, suffocating weight settled over my chest, but it wasn't the weight of sorrow or defeat. It was the arrival of a dangerous, freezing clarity that hardened my heart into pure, clinical ice. They truly believed that by unleashing this vicious public smear campaign on social media, my fear of professional ruin and social isolation would force me to collapse on my knees. They believed I would instantly reopen my bank accounts, surrender my hard-earned capital, and continue to function as the defenseless financial doormat they had plundered for a lifetime. They completely underestimated the absolute, terrifying reach of an analytical mind that had spent a decade mapping the multi-layered financial compliance frameworks of global banking empires. The time for quiet compliance and emotional weeping had officially ended. The battlefield was fully prepared, and it was time to unleash a ruthless legal retribution narrative that would systematically dismantle their reality. To understand the volatile nature of the fury that was currently freezing beneath my stoic composure, you have to understand the deep, systemic exploitation of my childhood. For 15 long years, since the devastating, sudden passing of my father when I was just a 14-year-old girl, I had been forced to operate as the single, unyielding pillar of the Rossi household. While my mother dissolved into a permanent, theatrical state of helpless grief and weaponized incompetence, I was the one who grew up overnight to manage the family's survival. I worked 3 separate low-wage retail shifts after my high school classes, riding my worn bicycle through freezing winter rain to deliver my entire earnings directly into my mother's palms. I managed the household utility balances, negotiated with predatory credit collectors, and sacrificed my own youth to ensure that our family home was never foreclosed on by the lenders. I channeled the isolation into an ironclad academic discipline, eventually earning a full scholarship to study forensic accounting and white-collar compliance architecture at an elite university. But while I was surviving on instant coffee and studying until my eyes literally bled from the blue glare of my monitor, a parallel universe of unearned luxury was being constructed right beside me. My younger brother, Brian, was the undisputed golden child of my mother's warped universe, a boy whose profound laziness was treated by the household as a delicate, artistic virtue. Brian had never held a real job for more than 2 consecutive weeks, claiming that the monotonous structure of an honest day's labor induced unmanageable levels of psychological anxiety. Instead, he spent his 20s living in the finished basement of my parents' home, treating the property like a hereditary kingdom that I was biologically obligated to finance. He continuously squandered thousands of dollars a month on top-tier luxury gaming gadgets, premium designer apparel, and extravagant weekend vacations to tropical resorts with his high society friends. Whenever I attempted to establish a financial boundary, pointing out that Brian's insatiable greed was actively draining my personal savings, my mother would unleash an avalanche of emotional manipulation. "You are so incredibly bitter and jealous of your brother's vibrant spirit, Rebecca," my mother would shriek, her voice dripping with a weaponized guilt that had controlled my actions for decades. "Your father left us with absolutely nothing, and your brother is going through a fragile emotional transition, yet you're sitting on a massive corporate compliance salary in the city. Family is supposed to be an unbreakable circle of total solidarity, but you treat your own flesh and blood like we are a compliance liability on your spreadsheets." For a long time, the lingering chains of childhood conditioning forced me to comply, and I quietly paid those bills, viewing the siphoned capital as a tax I had to pay just to keep the peace. But the moment I discovered that my mother and Brian had secretly accessed my private digital checkbook tokens to purchase a $40,000 luxury vehicle under my name, my compliance died forever. I closed the valve on the financial lifeline, locked down my corporate assets behind multi-layered digital security walls, and walked out of their suburban home without looking back a single time. The viral social media smear campaign was their desperate, frantic response to that boundary, a public execution designed to force my submission through reputational terror. The following morning, I didn't engage in an emotional debate in the comment section of her viral post, and I didn't send a flurry of defensive text messages trying to beg for her mercy. I walked directly into the high-rise corporate headquarters of my compliance firm downtown, stepping into the private suite of an elite, cutthroat defamation and white-collar litigation attorney named Sarah Chen. Sarah Chen deals exclusively in high-stakes corporate reputation management, and she reviewed the viral social media screenshots with a cold, calculating seriousness that mirrored my own resolve. "This isn't just a standard family argument, Rebecca," Sarah Chen stated, her fingers tapping against her mahogany desk with a rhythmic precision. "Your mother has explicitly targeted your professional credentials in a public forum, falsely accusing a certified financial compliance officer of corporate theft and deliberate economic fraud. We are filing an immediate, high-priority civil defamation lawsuit with the state court this afternoon, requesting an emergency deposition subpoena for their complete electronic registries." The legal machinery moved forward with the silent, mechanical velocity of an execution squad executing a clinical strike against an unsuspecting target. Within less than 72 hours, Sarah Chen's team utilized the court's high-priority discovery mandates to execute a total digital subpoena on Brian's and my mother's banking platforms. As the encrypted transaction ledgers and raw metadata files began to fully decrypt onto my office monitors, a devastating financial plot twist laid itself bare before my eyes with absolute, mathematical certainty. I sat in the quiet dark of my office, watching the rows of forensic data compile themselves into a narrative of absolute human depravity that left me completely breathless. The Family Inheritance Trust Fund, which had been established by our late paternal grandfather and was supposed to be split equally between myself and Brian upon our 30th birthdays, was completely hollowed out. The forensic paper trail proved that 2 years prior, Brian had utilized an advanced digital signature tracing software to perfectly forge my fiduciary approval codes on a series of legacy document transfers. He had systematically siphoned over $140,000 from my half of the inheritance trust, routing the capital through a web of dummy online betting accounts and luxury gadget brokers. But the true, sickening depth of the betrayal didn't stop at the plunder of my grandfather's legacy. It extended directly into the heart of his own mother's survival. The data tokens revealed that Brian had managed to install a hidden keylogging software on our mother's personal smartphone device months ago. He had captured her primary administrative banking passwords, utilizing the credentials to execute a covert, multi-layered drainage of her lifelong retirement portfolios and state pension reserves. He had been siphoning exactly $3,000 a month from Helen's retirement accounts, leaving her primary financial reserves on the absolute brink of a total, catastrophic collapse. Brian had spent 2 years living like a king off the stolen blood money of his own mother's future, completely confident that his status as the favorite golden child would shield him from any investigation. But the ultimate, most repulsive layer of the conspiracy was the realization that my mother's viral smear campaign had been entirely orchestrated by Brian behind the scenes. The internal text message logs between them revealed that when the bank issued an emergency overdraft alert on Helen's retirement account, Brian had panicked, falsely claiming that I was the one who had locked her funds through a corporate compliance freeze. He had actively engineered the social media smear campaign, ghostwriting the post for our mother to force me into a legal corner so that I would wire them emergency capital before the bank could execute a fraud audit. They were preparing to let the hammer fall on my reputation, completely unaware that their unyielding greed had just handed a forensic compliance officer the exact warrant for their own execution. I stared at the glowing monitor for a long time, the cold light reflecting in my eyes as a profound, permanent sense of finality settled deep into my soul. The final fragile threads of familial obligation and conditioned childhood guilt broke completely away from my heart, leaving behind a clean, unbreakable resolve. I picked up my smartphone, my fingers completely steady as I dialed my mother's personal number, my voice dropping an octave into a freezing, clinical peace that would silence her world completely. The line clicked open, and before she could even unleash her practiced, dramatic script of maternal condemnation, I cut through the air like an iron gate locking her out. "Do not open your mouth to speak a single word, Mother," I said, my voice smooth, quiet, and carrying an immense, unyielding resonance that caused her breath to instantly catch. "You are currently being recorded on a secure corporate compliance line, and I am staring at the complete, decrypted forensic bank ledger of the Rossi family accounts. Your golden child, Brian, has spent the last 24 months using a keylogging software to systematically drain your entire lifelong retirement portfolio down to the absolute cents. He has stolen over $140,000 from my grandfather's inheritance trust, forged my legal fiduciary signature on federal documents, and ghostwritten the very social media post you used to branding me as a monster." The line fell into an instant, suffocating silence, the only sound being the sudden, ragged breathing of my mother as her mind struggled to process the mathematical reality of her exposure. "That's a lie. You are fabricating these numbers because you want to destroy your brother's reputation," Helen finally screamed, her weaponized confidence completely cracking under the panic. "Brian would never touch my retirement. He is a beautiful, sensitive boy who loves this family, and you are just a calculating sociopath trying to gaslight us into submission. If you believe my data is a fabrication, Mother, I suggest you open the secure link I just messaged to your device," I replied, my tone remaining entirely level, free of any remaining anger. The link contained the crystal-clear digital audit sheets, the matching biometric IP footprint logs from Brian's gaming console, and the transaction paths routing her pension directly to his luxury gadget accounts. I watched the live metadata tracker on my screen show the exact second she opened the files, followed instantly by a sharp, horrified gasp that echoed through the phone speaker like a physical blow. "Oh my God. Brian, what have you done?" my mother whispered, her voice completely stripped of its old, theatrical authority, collapsing into a weak, pathetic weeping that made her look incredibly small. "He told me you were the one stealing the funds, Rebecca. He told me you wanted us to be evicted from the property. Please, you have to help me fix this. You chose to trust the lies of a thief because it protected your vanity, Mother, and the time for internal family fixes has officially expired," I said softly, before disconnecting the call with a clean click. The spectacular, public courtroom showdown commenced 3 weeks later inside the high-stakes environment of the State Circuit Judicial Palace downtown. The courtroom was packed to the absolute ceilings with local corporate executives, white-collar compliance specialists, and extended family members who had watched the viral social media campaign unfold. Brian sat at the defense table, his arrogant golden child facade completely intact for the initial 30 minutes, his posture draped in a cheap off-the-rack blazer as he offered a smug, patronizing smirk to the journalists. He genuinely believed that because this was a civil defamation and inheritance dispute, his sister's legal team would simply settle for a quiet, financial compromise behind closed doors. He had absolutely no idea that Sarah Chin and I had already coordinated with the state prosecutor's white-collar fraud division, converting the civil courtroom into a definitive criminal trap. Judge Harrison Vance cleared his throat, his sharp, analytical eyes peering over his reading glasses as he looked down from the high judicial bench at the defense table. Mr. Rossi, your counsel has presented a series of vague, unsubstantiated arguments claiming these multi-layered asset transfers were part of a verbal family agreement, Judge Vance stated, his voice carrying a freezing severity. But the forensic compliance data presented by the plaintiff paints a completely alternative, unassailable picture of calculated identity forgery and grand larceny. Sarah Chin stood up from our table, her movements calm, programmatic, and entirely graceful as she activated the courtroom's centralized media network. The presentation screens violently flashed to life, displaying the unedited digital signature overlays side by side with the keylogging software tokens seized from Brian's hardware devices. The raw, greedy timeline of his multi-thousand-dollar fraud reveal filled the room with a heavy, suffocating weight, leaving absolutely no room for legal defense or reasonable doubt. Brian's arrogant smirk froze instantly on his face, his eyes widening in absolute, breathless horror as his mind struggled to process the total, catastrophic collapse of his unearned reality. The judge slammed his heavy wooden gavel down with a definitive thunderclap that echoed through the silent, reverent room like an executioner's axe. This court finds the defendant, Brian Rossi, completely liable for multi-layered civil fraud, identity theft, and malicious defamation against an officer of the Compliance Board, Judge Vance decreed, his voice booming through the speakers. I am officially ordering an immediate, total civil asset recovery protocol, authorizing the state sheriff's department to liquidate the defendant's luxury vehicles, electronic assets, and private accounts to satisfy the full restitution of Rebecca's inheritance. Furthermore, under the strict provisions of our civil defamation statutes, both Brian Rossi and Helen Rossi are ordered to publish a formal, unedited public online apology across the exact same community networks they used to execute their smear campaign. The apology will remain pinned to the top of those digital platforms for exactly 90 consecutive days, explicitly detailing the full forensic reality of their fraud and vindicating Rebecca's professional reputation down to the letter. At that exact second, the heavy double doors at the rear of the courtroom swung open, and two uniformed law enforcement officers stepped past the bar, their heavy combat boots crunching loudly on the carpet. They didn't offer Brian a polite explanation or allow my mother to unleash her weaponized, weeping accounts of family solidarity. They read him his criminal rights right in front of the entire gallery, sliding cold steel handcuffs over his wrists with a sharp, metallic ring that broke through the silent room. Brian let out a sharp, pathetic shriek of pure psychological collapse, his knees completely buckling beneath him as he was led down the center aisle in full view of the local press cameras, his body violently shaking with a frantic panic. My mother fell heavily back into her gallery chair, her face a grotesque mask of pale ash as she buried her face in her hands, her unearned high society pride completely shattered into millions of pieces. They had spent 28 years sacrificing the innocent child to feed the insatiable greed of the golden child, and they were finally being forced to face the unyielding gravity of the real world in absolute public ruin. The pacing of my life slowed down beautifully over the subsequent 12 months, allowing the frantic, white-hot drama of the past to transition into a continuous current of pure serenity and absolute personal triumph. I moved forward completely detached from their malice, relocating my primary compliance consultation networks to a stunning, sun-filled historic brownstone in a peaceful new city. My new sanctuary featured massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows that looked out over a quiet courtyard filled with ancient oak trees and fresh, wild lavender. The rooms inside my home were filled with the soft, comforting aroma of fresh espresso, beautiful literature, and the absolute, unshakable safety of a life where my boundaries would never be violated again. The public online retraction had fully restored my flawless professional reputation, reversing the negative energy of the past and launching my firm into a historic level of expansion on the international stage. The final, emotionally resonant closure of my journey arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon when a certified legal package was delivered to my office from the compliance firm handling the final liquidation of my parents' estate. The state courts had successfully completed the civil asset recovery, forcing my mother to sell the suburban family home to satisfy the remaining balance of the $140,000 inheritance debt Brian had accumulated. Attached to the standard legal disclosures was a short, crumpled note written by my mother from her new kitchen table, her handwriting shaky and completely stripped of its old, arrogant flourish. I am sitting alone in a tiny, rented two-bedroom apartment near the industrial rail yards tonight, Rebecca, the note read, her bitter words trying one final time to pierce my armor. The bank took the house. Your brother Brian is currently serving his 30-month sentence in a maximum security state facility, and my health is failing from the constant stress of the cleaning shifts I have to take in my 60s. Every single night the trains shake the thin walls of this place, and I think about how hard you work to keep us safe while we mocked your spreadsheets. You have a beautiful new corporate life in a safe city, you have everything, and we have absolutely nothing left but the bitter consequences of our choices. I hope your cold, calculating revenge was worth what you did to this family. I held the small piece of paper over the wastebasket, letting it slip from my fingers without a single beat of hesitation, regret, or emotional weight. The absolute destruction of their household hadn't been caused by my cold revenge. It was simply the natural, mathematical harvest of the bitter, greedy seeds they had planted over a lifetime of cruelty. They had spent decades treating my quiet compliance and deep kindness as a bottomless resource to be mined, fully confident that I would always bleed to keep them warm. I turned away from the wastebasket, walking over to the large glass windows of my beautiful living room, watching the autumn leaves dance in the cool city wind, a profound, permanent sense of serenity settling deep into my heart. If you are listening to this story right now, and you are the child whose silence and hard work have been systematically weaponized by the people who share your last name, I want you to hear me clearly. Your value is never defined by the absolute blindness or the predatory greed of a toxic household dynamic that refuses to see your true worth. Strength does not mean enduring financial fraud, emotional neglect, or public humiliation for the sake of a fake family peace that only serves the thieves in your life. True power is born the exact moment you stop begging for the validation of people who trade love for currency, and you begin to use your own brilliant mind to establish unbreakable walls around your future. My victory was a beautiful achievement, a complete deployment of legal strategy that permanently shielded my grandfather's legacy and my own justice from the hands of criminals. But the true victory, the one that allowed me to look into the mirror every single morning with a peaceful, confident smile, was the absolute freedom of knowing that I am more than enough. Home is not a geographic structure defined by a shared surname, a genetic code, or the toxic obligation to sacrifice your youth for people who treat your existence like a convenience. Home is where your boundaries are treated as absolute, where your hard work is genuinely honored, and above all else, home is where you are respected.